Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Now, today I'm bringing you a bit of a different video. We're going over the biggest news in the college football world this week. It is James Franklin heading to Virginia Tech. I know, mind-blowing. That is a huge get for Virginia Tech. We're going to talk about it shortly. But as you will see, this is not coming from my video. This is coming from a podcast I did earlier this week with friends of the channel, Reed Napper of the Love for the Game podcast and Roddy Perlito. Both of those guys' channels will be in the description below, as well as the link to the full podcast episode below. Be sure to go check that out for all things week 13 of the season, college football playoff rankings, everything you can think of. Link to that will be in the description below. And as always, if you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps me a lot. And let's go ahead and talk about James Franklin.
Well, we have to move on to the biggest story of the weekend in the breaking news out of Blacksburg, Virginia. Virginia Tech has hired its next head coach, and that is James Franklin, the former Penn State head coach. After being fired after a 3-3 start to the season, starting the Big Ten play 0-3, he has a career record of 128-60 between his time at Vanderbilt and Penn State, 104 wins total at Penn State, the second most in program history, a Big Ten title to his name in 2016, and brought Penn State to their first college football playoff appearance in 2024. He now leads the Virginia Tech Hokies into a new era. Virginia Tech has made it very clear they are going to start heavily investing into the football program. Reports saying over 220 million, like north of $220 million are going to be invested into the football program. And now you bring in arguably a top 10 coach in the sport, and you're now bringing him to Blacksburg, Virginia, which at times in the early 2000s, Virginia Tech used to be one of the biggest brands in the sport. It is worth noting he is 4-21 all time against AP top 10 opponents. Again, the majority of those matchups were against Michigan and Ohio State. It is worth clarifying that. I think they just reached a peak that they couldn't surpass and decided to part ways. So now, curious to get your boys' thoughts on it. Colton, let me throw it over to you real quick. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Franklin, especially in that region, for Virginia Tech to land him, he's not going to have any problem like adjusting in terms of recruiting. So I think as soon as next year, obviously depending on how the offseason goes, as soon as next year, this could be a 7-9 win team. That's just the kind of needle movement that a James Franklin has. And obviously, like you said, he got to a point at Penn State where it wasn't good enough. Like, they got pretty far. They could never win the big game. But for him to go to Virginia Tech, I mean, expectations are, for lack of a better term, just through the floor right now. They don't really have super high expectations. And I think that with like you said, a lot of those top 10 matchups coming against those elite of the elite programs in Michigan and Ohio State, he's not going to see as many of those. And the top 10 teams that he does see, he'll probably not be as difficult, like a Florida State who's fringe top 10, or Georgia Tech who's definitely beatable. I feel like it's going to be a night and day difference for a guy like James Franklin to get that change of scenery, whereas he might not have been, the guy at Penn State to turn them into a national champion. He could be the guy at Virginia Tech who returns them back to ACC title contention. And I feel like that's very valuable for them, obviously, because they haven't been there in so long. And it's very valuable for a guy like James Franklin who needs that boost of not low expectation. Like, they're not expecting him to be good, but not expecting him to win the national championship or get fired, essentially.
He could definitely reach a level at least similar to where he was at Penn State, and have a lot less pressure on him.
And on top of that, he was a guy who saw like top 15 classes at Penn State virtually every single year. And I think at Virginia Tech, especially with the newfound, funding that they received this year, or that they announced that they receive for the future, I feel like they could be in the same exact spot. You have a top 15 recruiting class annually for Virginia Tech means a world of a difference than a top 15 for Penn State, who, even if you're top 15 at Penn State, you're behind at least two teams every year.
Yeah, and I mean, in the ACC now, who are they really competing with? I mean, Clemson's fallen off at least for now. Georgia Tech is kind of on the uprise, but they've looked beatable at least the last few games. So who knows, like their further outlook, especially if Brent Key ends up staying going. Florida State, as you mentioned, can fluctuate, especially with Norvell there.
Well, exactly that. If you're Penn State, you're going to be an underdog every year essentially versus an Ohio State or versus a Michigan or versus in the past 2 years in Indiana. And at Virginia Tech, I mean Clemson, maybe Florida State. At Virginia Tech, you're gonna be able to, at least with the teams that are on your schedule. It's not an Ohio State who's going to be loaded with 25 5 stars at the very least. It's going to be the top 3 most talented team in football. It's going to be a Clemson who is very talented, but it's like top 10, maybe top 15. Florida State, similar. Georgia Tech, definitely not top 15, maybe top 30. It's going to be those types of teams, and I think he's going to thrive in that kind of competition level.
For sure. As someone who grew up in Northern Virginia, knows at least the Northern Virginia, high school football space pretty well. Virginia as a whole is pretty slept on, like talent-wise. For instance, Travion Henderson's from Virginia, and you saw what he was able to do at Ohio State the past few seasons, and look at what he's doing in the NFL now. So just want to throw that out there. There's a ton of talent in Virginia that I feel like is being overlooked.
Yeah, and if there's any like loser out of this, I don't think it's Penn State necessarily. I think it's like the Marylands and the Virginias of the world, because whereas they haven't had the competition of an elite Virginia Tech as a prospect in recruiting, now they do. And now I think we see Mike Loxley's not going to have as easy of a time recruiting 5 stars to Maryland. Virginia's not been elite at recruiting by any means, but they'll probably have an even tougher time. And in that general Northeast area, Syracuse's Fran Brown is going to have a tougher time. That general area of the country is going to have a much tougher time, because Penn State's going to be Penn State. They're going to be able to recruit whoever the next coach is. But now it's another player who's going to be at least in that top 25 league in terms of recruiting every year.
Let me get over to Roddy, get his thoughts on everything, and then I have another question to propose to you guys. But let me get Roddy's thoughts first.
Yeah, so I was thinking as y'all were talking, he's the second best coach in the ACC. I mean, I would say maybe Brent Key for what he's done for the past 2 years and how he's kind of brought Georgia Tech to prominence. But I mean, I'm only putting Dabo over him for legacy and what he's been able to do. And, the playoffs he's made, obviously a national champion. I wouldn't take Jeff Brom over James Franklin. I wouldn't take Mario Cristobal over James Franklin. I mean, they might be the same guy. I know we've had conversations about that, but I would take James Franklin. I think, of course, Mario has the benefit of being in the, richest, one of the richest state in terms of talent in Florida. But I think this is a huge home run. And Colton, you were saying from Penn State, I just love the move. Ultimately, you boys went over pretty much everything that I was going to say. The recruiting base, I think he has a lot. It in a way is kind of like Penn State light. You have the environment, like obviously when you give the fans something to cheer for. When that Enter Sandman comes on, it gets dark. You know what I'm saying? I love Enter Sandman. And I think this is a good landing spot for him. And shame on Maryland. They read up with Loxley. I mean, shame on, anybody, Rutgers, whoever that's in that area that's going to have to compete. Like you had the chance, we kind of heard rumblings about this pretty early, and we're still in the season. So, we might see changes, but there aren't a lot of great players on the market. So
with Virginia Tech publicly saying, hey, we're not doing this anymore. We're not going to be bad anymore. We're spending the money. That is what you have to do. That is just what you have to do in this age. You saw Texas Tech completely buy into the program. You've seen Texas A&M completely buy in. And those are 2 teams who are in prime position to make the playoff and prime position to win their conferences. One of them being the SEC. I think Virginia Tech could win 9 games next year with the amount of money that they are pledging to the program.
I don't hate
That's
it.
That's not money that you go out and get Ohio State's backup running back. That's money you can go and get Ohio State's running back. That is competing. That is Florida State caliber buy-in. That's Clemson caliber buy-in easily. And those are 2 teams that I know suck this year, but have the resources to win the ACC. And if James Franklin, and I think it's possible that he does do that, they could win 9-10 games next year and be in the ACC championship.
One last question I have for you guys relative to James Franklin, and it's going to be on the Penn State side. Can Penn State even upgrade at head coach? Because I feel like no matter what, whoever they hire, they're looking at a 3 to 4 year rebuild in my eyes.
Yeah, the short answer is no. I don't think they're going to go out and get a guy who has like as much proven talent as a James Franklin, but I would also say you could hire a guy that comes out and is automatically very good, like a Dan Lanning type who succeeds or is successful right away, even though it's not necessarily the most ideal circumstances ever. That ironically, that might be a is it Stein?
Will Stein?
Yeah, from Oregon, or Colin Klein, or of course I said from the beginning, Hartline, one of those guys. I feel like if you're gonna go out and get a guy who can recruit, because I mean, you have room. They're not gonna fire you in the first year. You have room to kind of figure out exactly what your philosophies are as a head coach if you've never been a head coach before, and take a chance on a guy who can recruit and just get talent there so that when you do figure out your philosophies, when you do get the coordinator situations worked out, that everything's kind of already there to work with, and you're 3 years in and you kind of have maybe a little bit worse roster. Maybe instead of top 15, it's top 20, top 25. And you're sitting on back-to-back 7-8 win seasons, and all of a sudden 10 wins a year isn't looking so bad anymore, and you're kind of wondering. So I would definitely go for a guy who can recruit, like a Heartline. Like I said, you have those assets there for when, I guess, the rebuild, quote unquote, the 2 or 3 year rebuild that you're hoping for kind of reaches the zenith of like talent and coaching all at once.